Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. I'm Matt Levitt, director of the Washington Institute's Reinhardt Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligence, and I'm thrilled to be sitting here with my colleague, Dr. Aaron Zelin, the Borow Senior Fellow here at the Washington Institute, also in the Counterterrorism Program. We are really pleased and honored to have joining with us via Zoom Thomas Hegghammer and Gina Ligon, to join us in this launch of Aaron's new ISIS interactive map. Since the summer of 2021, Aaron has led a team of researchers culling together as much open source information on the activities of the Islamic State around the world and distilling it down into a format that could be mapped and put into a tool that would be made available to everyone for free at the Washington Institute's website to be able to better understand the rise, the fall, and the current status of the Islamic State, its activities, its operations, its logistics and financial activities around the world. And I'm really, really pleased and honored to be able to sit here with you, Aaron, today at the launch of this amazing tool. I'll turn the floor over to you for your opening comments. We will ask Gina and Thomas to offer some comments as well. For those who don't know, Thomas is a senior fellow in politics at All Souls College at Oxford University and has written a variety of really important books that you should all read. Gina is a professor of management and collaboration science at the University of Nebraska Omaha, where she directs the National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology and Education Center, or INSITE, which is a U.S. Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence. Aaron, you've been waiting for this for a long time. The floor is yours. Tell us about your map.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And thanks to everybody that's watching this online. There's obviously so many people to thank that made this map possible. I'll leave most of that to the end, but I do want to acknowledge up front someone in particular first, Richard Borow. This map is dedicated in his honor. He passed away this past September. I thank him for all he's done to help out with my career in almost the 11 years I've been at the Washington Institute now. His feedback and advice was full of sage wisdom. He provided important North Stars for me to remember while conducting my work and to never forget its ultimate purpose. As for the map itself, I'm excited to share this with everyone publicly finally. We've been working on this mapping tool at the Institute going back to August 2021. This interactive map provides a novel, accessible way to understand the Islamic State's global reach and activities, offering a clearer illustration than text alone could do. It also moves beyond sort of a traditional scholarly focus on attack data with maps, but also offering content related to IS propaganda and media, designations for individuals and entities related to the group, as well as legal cases of people that have been arrested related to Islamic State activity globally. The launch only marks the beginning of a living project for which continual updates will cover new developments as well as modifications to older historical entries. Thus, this map reflects an iterative process and will evolve over time. Why launch now? Some will wonder, because while the story of the Islamic State may have receded from news coverage, a jihadi resurgence could occur anytime, as we've seen the growth of the group in places like sub-Saharan Africa or the growth in South Asia, as well as the continued generational incubation of potential future recruits in places like Northeast Syria. Prior to the Islamic State's reemergence in 2013, many government officials and researchers believed the group had been defeated in its prior iteration. Now, in the so-called post-territorial control phase, after 2019, history is, in a sense, repeating itself. Many inside and outside governments who had previously focused on IS and the jihadi movement have pivoted to more exigent problems, such as the rise of the far right in Western countries, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and worries over China's growing strength and revisionism regarding the current world order. Increased attention to such issues is no doubt warranted, but the lull between large-scale jihadi mobilizations should not be mistaken for an end to the challenge itself. Absorbing lessons from the past, this map will be an aid for that, whether or not IS recaptures territory or re-engages in large-scale external operations. Researchers and officials will have a one-stop repository for understanding current trends and the background that informs them. While the map includes a large amount of information, it consciously seeks to separate the signal from the noise, offering a corrective to the glut of unorganized IS data floating in the public domain. Readers will find clear, well-categorized capsules here that tell a much larger story of IS currently. This map is not aimed at sort of reinventing the wheel either regarding basic data on IS. For example, organizations such as START and ACLED have created their own maps that attempt to catalog the entirety of IS's attacks alongside other groups. This map, by comparison, is not intended to track every single last IS operation, but rather to collect key information points since the group's founding back in 1999 when Abu Musab al-Zarqawi established the organization. The map, of course, will be biased toward newer data, given my own more recent scholarship and focus on the group since 2010 in particular. IS, of course, is a lot more active now than it was in earlier years when pre-2013, for example, it was only based in Iraq and bore no professed, at least, transnational ambitions at the time. In the past decade, it has dramatically increased its number of attacks and produced vastly more data. This map is unique in being composed almost entirely from primary source materials. It draws from both the Islamic State's official media releases as well as government press releases or court documents, and is searchable by category, location, various phases / names of the group, and keywords. The map also contains statistics and IS global attacks based on its claims of responsibility in its weekly Al-Naba newsletter, dating back to July 2018, when the group started putting out infographics specifically on all of this. Therefore, even if the map itself does not contain every single attack on the map, it does have a statistics box, will provide an updated comprehensive list quantitatively of IS's claims. Also, I've made a conscious effort not to include violent visual content involving humans, even as the map does include depictions of violent acts such as burning of buildings and IS boasts about casualties. The point is not to censor the reality of the Islamic State's extremism or brutality, but rather to prioritize the mental health and welfare of users. The data, as this map amply will show in a second, provides plenty to analyze without adding gore to it, which I would argue has overrated analytical utility. And with that, I'm going to share the map with everybody and go through what it's all about, as well as provide examples of how it could be used as well. So when you get onto the map, you have this splash page here where it has a summary essay of the full introductory essay, which if you click on, you'll be able to get a longer look at everything related to the map and anything you want to know how to use it and the background on it. Going back to it, there's also a tutorial button, which will help provide details for those that want to learn about every single function on it as well. So then you click out of that, and at the top, you'll see the amount of records that currently are live on the website, 1,348. This will continue to expand. We have another 100 or so that are currently in the queue to be edited. So even after this is launched today, you'll start seeing more and more entries as the days go by. Then you can also see when the map has been last updated. One of the cool features is that if you actually put your mouse over the date, it'll show you the exact time. So it last was updated yesterday at 5:07 p.m. Eastern time, of course. So after that, we have the last updated, so you can see what has been most updated most recently on the map in relation to it being a live product. So one of the things in here that might be of interest just to show people, for example, is when you click on an entry, you then get a link at the top, which is unique to every single entry. So if you wanted to use this and cite it some way, you'll have the specific link to go to. In terms of the box here on the right, you'll see the title of the release, and then you'll see the different types of media items. And as you can see, you can scroll back and forth. This is the case of the most recent Pledge of Allegiance to IS's new leader this past December from Wilayat Wasat Ifriqiya in the DRC region. It has the date when this occurred, the location, generally speaking, and then a summary of what's going on here. And then what's one of the cool features of this map, and I think really enhances it in many ways, is that there are related entries as well as related locations, which we'll see in other examples, which connect different aspects of the map to each other. So therefore can really start going down rabbit holes. So if you then click on this entry, you'll see the original audio message announcing the death of the leader. We located in Jassim, Syria, where the leader actually died. And then it has a description of what was in the audio message. And as I noted, it then has related entries related to all of the new pledges of allegiance, whether the pictures or the videos. So as you can see, it's a very useful product when you use it for research or whatever you're interested in related to the group. So if you close out the last updated thing, we're going to go over here to the right side, and you can click on sort of understanding what's actually on the map itself. So this sort of red color is the claims of responsibility. This blue color is U.S. designated and sanctioned entities. This greenish color is different magazine entries. Another green color is statements and videos. This yellowish green is pictures. And then this blue is legal cases. And then one of the cool ideas we had for this map was to try and create a heat map of where IS is most active. And unlike a lot of maps where you'll see the whole country being splashed with just black and therefore is not really accurate portrayal of what they're actually doing, we wanted to do this based off of whether they have territorial control, a large presence, a medium presence, or a small presence. And as you can see, it's more targeted in many ways than you'll typically get. And therefore, it right sizes sort of the reality of what IS is doing. So with that being said, we'll go over to the filtering function where you can select a time period for the organization. And you could do it based off of the different names that the group has had over the years. So of course, as I noted, there isn't a ton of data related to some of the early eras yet. But as you could see, when I clicked on Jamaat al-Tawhid wal-Jihad, which is what the group was originally called when they were in Iraq, is that there are changes on the map in terms of the number of entries, as well as even on the left side, these bars get filtered as well, which makes it a lot easier for trying to find what you're actually looking for. Just to give an example, we have the statement where Abu Musab al-Zarqawi pledges bayah to Osama bin Laden back in the day, and you can scroll through the statement here. If you want a larger view, you can then click on it and view the document, and then you can have an easier time reading it. So if we go back to the entry again, you'll have the description, and under here you'll have a related entry, and you can actually see the State Department's specific designation for the group itself. So you can see how we're doing both sides of this, not just the group's primary sources, but also the primary sources coming from the government as well. If you click out of it, it'll then go to the full map itself again. And again, you can try and filter things related to countries in addition to the different group names. So one example might be of interest more recently related to the attacks that happened in Iran this past October. You can click on a piece of the map, and then you can click on the specific attack related to it and the claim of responsibility. It pops up here in the thing. It gets the original in Arabic, but we also have the then translation into Farsi as well. So we're trying to make this, showing the whole ecosystem of how IS does this as well. And then one of the cool things again is the related entries. So unlike in prior cases where there's similar related entries from similar categories, you could see here there's one that's an al-Naba editorial related to the attack, a subsequent video that the group put out related to it, and then actually arrests that the Iranian regime put out afterwards, and it has the original source from their local media to get into it. So you could see that there's many levels of this data that you can extract through, which obviously will take time for everybody to try and find things, but you could really have a deep understanding of this in many ways. Now going to the different specific categories, I just wanted to highlight certain things that might be of interest to people. So for the statements, we're going to go first to this one. So this is a video that was put out back in 2015 by IS, congratulating Boko Haram for originally joining up with IS. And one of the cool things is that, again, related entries, and you can actually then click on the original bayah from, at the time, the leader of the group, Abu Bakr al-Shakau. And of course, then you could see that there's these other related videos under this that has different parts of the Islamic State congratulating them on this event. Then over here you have magazines, which is a bunch of translation or summaries of al-Naba editorials, as well as martyrologies and things like that. And the most recent one we put up is just from a couple of weeks ago. But the most recent one we're actually in the process of editing. So we're going to be very quick with putting this type of content up as well. Then one of the cool features too for the claims of responsibility is that there's sometimes infographics related to this. And then so again, I know I'm reiterating this, but under the related entries, that then you can press on the link and it'll go to the specific attacks that it's talking about on the infographic as well. In terms of the photos, one of the ideas for this is to show the sort of the daily life of the Islamic State as well as the pledges of Bayah. One of the longer term ideas we have is to add all of the governance related content as well from when IS controlled territory in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. But here, for example, is a photo released in relation to when IS in the DRC watched an actual IS video. I know very meta in their propaganda, but you can also see under it that there's related entries to when other IS fighters in West Africa province or in the Mozambique province also were doing the same thing. So you can see again how connected all of this is. When we go to the US designated category, you can click on any individual. You know, these categories are all scrollable, and you get a document from the Treasury Department or State Department with actual designation. Again, similar setup with the box on the right side, but you could also see how somebody might be connected into a broader financial network or helping the Islamic State out in a particular manner. Going next to this for the entities or companies, here's one example of a company that's helping out IS in Syria and Iraq that's based in Turkey, which was designated earlier this year. And one of the cool things is that you could see the related locations to this company, as well as its network locally, and then also how it has financial connections to other networks that have previously been designated. In this case is the Al-Rawi network, which has been infamous over the years for its connections to the Islamic State. And then finally, the last category we have here is legal cases. So one of the examples which might be of interest is al-Shafi al-Sheikh, who everybody knows is one of the so-called Beatles involved in the beheading campaign in Syria against the journalists and humanitarian workers. Again, similar formats. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet, but we also have sources which link back to where these originally come from. And then again, you could see the connections in the network and you can click on them. And then in this case, it also has a related entry for the designation of al-Shafi al-Sheikh by the US Department of State previously. So you could see not only how they're connected with the designation in the court case, and you could get the whole picture of the individual sort of evolution over time. So when we leave aside sort of these categories, we're going to go up to the search box, and just an example of how you can use it. You want to search, say, an embassy attack that IS has conducted. One of the more recent ones this past fall was related to the attack on the Russian embassy in Kabul. Again, you can scroll to see the different data related to this. And then you can also see under here that there's a related entry that IS then put out a NABA editorial related to it, which then you can scroll through and also have a summary here as well. And then finally, over here on the top right is a statistics box. This is sort of a quantitative way of having all of IS's attacks noted, even if we don't have every single attack pinned on the map itself. And you could scroll by specific province or when they've conducted and claimed an attack in a particular location. It's important to note that in the case of IS, there's been some contraction in some cases where, say, you know, in Syria, there was Wilayat al-Raqqa, Wilayat Halab, or what have you. In Iraq, Wilayat Nineveh, Wilayat al-Anbar. And then those then turned into Wilayat al-Sham or Wilayat al-Iraq. Or in the case of, Wilayat al-Sahel, now it used to be part of Wilayat Wasat or Wilayat Gharb Ifriqiya. And then you could see the number of attacks over time from the month, the year, and since July 2018 when they really started doing this. And then besides that, you could also just click on an entry that has a number of items, and then it'll come up with a whole host of options where you can scroll through and look at different types of entities, say in the general London region. So just in terms of the future of this map, we're hoping to, add a filtered timelines, so it's better to disaggregate this data in the future. And then besides that, we're hoping to also add other types of information in the future, whether it's the State Department's rewards for justice, killed IS leaders based off of the Department of Defense, U.S. Central Command, and U.S. Africa Command press releases, as well as potentially adding a statistics box under the claims of responsibility statistics box related to foreign returnees and repatriation. This map would not have been possible without the spirited assistance of many individuals along the way and the teamwork over the past year and a half. International mapping, in particular, Kevin and Michael have been crucial in developing the aesthetics of the map. I owe a great deal of gratitude to the Washington Institute's publications, video, social media, and website team. Thanks to Maria, Jason, Corey, Carolina, and Scott. The feedback provided by my Washington Institute colleagues has been fundamental to the map's success. In particular, Matt here has provided expert advice on a range of issues since the map's inception. I'm also very grateful to the Institute's leadership, especially Rob and Patrick, for supporting this project. I'd also like to thank the Institute's donors for their financial support, particularly Jeanette and Eli Reinhardt, who generously fund the Counterterrorism and Intelligence Program. Last but not least, of course, this map would not have been available today without the hard work of many Institute research assistants and interns. Hannah, Nabras, Amal, and Delaney, thank you very much. Sarah deserves a special note for helping push this project to the finish line, working on all aspects of it. The map would not have been in its excellent shape it is in today, or the amount of entries without Sarah's steady diligence. So I'll leave it there for now. I'm looking forward to hearing the comments from my colleagues. Thank you, everybody.
Super, Aaron, thank you. Before I go over to Gina, I just want to encourage people to ask questions. You should feel free to populate the Q&A with your questions now. If you're on the Zoom, there's a Q&A function in the bottom center of your screen, and you can type in your question. If you're joining us via the website or YouTube, feel free to email your questions to policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. That's policyforum, one word, at Washington Institute, also one word, .org. Thank you. Gina, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so I love this project because if you have been following Aaron's work with jihadology, it's like he was able to get everything from what was used to be a collection of documents that you could request and content code, but to really visually put it together in this map is really interesting because it's like looking inside his brain. So I've really enjoyed seeing how he's arrayed this project. As I mentioned, I'm the director of the Department of Homeland Security's Counterterrorism Center of Excellence. And so I'm going to focus my comments on what I think this is, the relevance of this to the U.S. homeland, specifically the different government agencies that I think can use this, and then also what I hope to see inspired research from this. And so to get started, as you all know, a lot of the focus in the United States has funding focus from the IC has shifted over to great power competition. And so as a consequence of that, our analysts in the U.S. government do not have the same resourcing and training and different applications that they used to have during the height of the war on terror. But the problem persists. And so resources like what Aaron has created at the Washington Institute is incredibly important for some very specific parts of Department of Homeland Security that I thought I'd talk about. So first, Homeland Security Investigations, which is part of ICE, actually at DHS. One of the things they track are the looting and selling of antiquities that have been stolen during ISIS conflicts, and specifically to Western countries or the transport of them here. So the documents that you all have combined that not only show the Department of Treasury's designations, but also the images from the different spots, I think will be an incredible resource for HSI specifically. Second, the Travel and Immigration Branch. So The Counterterrorism Mission Center has something called the Travel and Immigration Bridge, where they're trying to very much understand travel patterns for foreign terrorist fighters, both for people coming here, but also the flow of when people leave to go fight in different conflicts. And so what you've created with this map will allow that particular unit to, even if they've never been there before, but to have a much better picture of what these conflicts and what these zones look like, because you have compiled all of these primary documents for them. So that's just excellent. And then last, the Tactics, Targets, and Procedures Bridge, which is part of the Counterterrorism Mission Center at DHS. So they're looking at international terrorism as it impacts the US, and specifically the evolution of tactics and targeting and different techniques. And so having those attacks and the really rich description that you all have created with that is incredibly important, because what it does is it allows for that particular group to be able to see the evolution and maybe to anticipate when some of these issues are going to move to Western countries or places that the US needs to protect. The second thing that I wanted to focus on, in addition to how it's going to help the government, which I think it will be used in a lot of coursework and a lot of onboarding and training for these new analysts. But the second thing that I'm personally excited about is the research it's going to inspire. So we run at Insight an annual grant competition, and it's open to universities, and universities can have partners on it. But it is supposed to be about counterterrorism and terrorism prevention research. And so what I'm really excited about is maybe that this map and the resources that are available could inspire some really important research that could be proposed to Insight. So I wrote down at least 3 studies that I'm hopeful to see proposed as part of our grant competition. And we fund projects every year. So one, I'm an organizational psychologist, so I'm a little biased, but I'm very interested in leader development. And so one of the things that I think this map could do is that it gives you such a rich understanding of what was going on at a given spot, at a given time. And if you could triangulate where those leaders were during that it might help you to see what kind of experiences have shaped them. And so from a leader development standpoint, you might be able to understand what kind of violence you could expect from them or what kinds of connections they might have. And so this map really provides like a multitude of resources for you to understand the life course of a leader of a specific part of the Islamic State. The second piece, I would say, is triangulating it with other projects. I saw you have court cases linked that you have sourced. We are funding a project right now with George Washington's Program on Extremism that collects those court records. It's called ISIS in America, and it's an incredible resource. And I wonder if there could be some other ways that we could triangulate some of the US-based people with those court cases that you already have with the information that Seamus's team is doing over a Program on Extremism, because I think that your 2 data sources are some of the best out there that I've seen that tracks ISIS in America. And then finally, I'd be really interested in a study that would look at TTPs, so that the evolution of innovation across these provinces to the United States or to other Western countries or vice versa, and to be able to understand how innovation sort of moves. And I think this visualization is incredible for that, because what it can do is it can actually highlight, like when a TTP was used in one area, and if a group moved chronologically, where that TTP was used again. And then the last study is one that I'm very excited about, is just the media that you gathered. I think that when we talk about homegrown violent extremists in the United States and trying to understand what media is compelling to them, what resonates with them, and because you've gathered all of these primary sources, translated them, have actual videos or audio, it allows researchers to actually content code and try to understand what is resonant about that content in a way that hasn't been done before. So just to summarize and give my time over to Thomas, because I'm excited to hear what he thinks about it. I think this is incredibly useful for the US government, specifically Department of Homeland Security. I think it's going to be in every course syllabus about ISIS, which is really exciting as a professor. And I'm excited about the research that it's going to inspire for the US. And I hope I can see some proposals that use this as a source document. Thanks.
All right, super. Students, take note. You just got 4 pieces of tangible direction from a person who hands out grants. Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this. I'm very, very excited about the map that you and your colleagues have created, Aaron, and congratulations on the launch. As you know, I've moved more in the past few years more into sort of data science programming stuff, and I'm very excited to see those sorts of initiatives in the jihadism field as well. So big contribution, and I want to do 3 things. First, highlight what I think are the 2 main contributions here, then suggest some extensions, and then perhaps throw some questions at the end about kind of where the limitations are with this data. So I see, I mean, there are lots of contributions here, obviously, but the 2 big ones. So one in the kind of general, from sort of a general public point of view, what you're doing here is giving the world a very useful and reliable tool for getting an overview of what has been going on with Islamic State over the years and what the situation is now. And it shows us, for example, first of all, how incredibly transnational it has been, how many different countries and continents this phenomenon has spanned. At the same time, it allows us to identify the main kind of clusters or zones where activity has been higher. And we can clearly see on your map that there have been sort of 3 main zones, globally speaking. There's Iraq and the Levant, of course. There's East and West Africa, and there is Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we can also zoom further in, and if we look at just Africa, your map makes it clear that although activity is spread out in many different locations, the clusters really in 4 areas. It's Mali, Burkina Faso, it's Nigeria, it's Eastern Congo, and it's northeastern Mozambique. So lots of very useful kind of bird's eye view insights to begin from this map. The other main contribution is more on the academic side, and that is to sort of provide a new type of, I suppose, data visualization. Because what you're doing here is to mix incident data with document data. So generally, when we produce maps like this, we tend to have one type of data, and it's usually incident data. So stuff from GTD or ACLED or somewhere else, and we make heat maps or chloroplat maps or whatever. But what you're doing is you're taking the material that you've collected over a very long time on your amazing jihadology website, and you're bringing that onto a map. So what you're doing is you're merging sort of incident maps and primary source repositories. And I struggle to think of I don't think it's been done before, at least not in this sort of systematic way. So instead, what you're doing, you're putting text in space, or text and images in space on a map, which is very, very useful. And that gives us a sort of an overview of activity that's kind of better grounded in a way than maps that have only incident data, sort of a richer view, as it were. And I think one of the main applications for this map is for education. So it's for people who, for students, for example, or new analysts who have not, who have yet to kind of immerse themselves in the sort of history of jihadism, this is a great tool to just browse, to just click around and see, what are the main areas, what are the key documents, what are the key events, etc. And it's probably much more sort of enticing and inviting than simply reading it in a text, and probably more memorable too, because you can locate incidents and documents in space. So, I mean, perhaps even more broadly, that this is a kind of it plays into the broader debate about how we measure terrorist activity, how we measure activity by groups like this. This is an ongoing debate. Do we measure it in executed attacks? Do we measure it in attacks as well as failed plots? Do we measure it in deaths, and so on and so forth? And here you're proposing to sort of bring in sort of multidimensional view on activity. A couple of suggestions to take this further. I think the biggest one would be to allow for downloading raw data. I think that's going to make it much easier for other academics to use the data, because most other academics will probably want to do their own analyses beyond sort of projecting them on a map. They want to look at sort of more analytical questions, causal questions, and to do that, it'll be much easier for them if they can just get access to the raw data, rather than have to kind of extract it manually from the or scrape it or whatever from the website. Another thing, and I guess you hinted to it in your introductory remarks, to kind of flesh out, or to make the filtering tool kind of more detailed in a way, because currently you can get a very detailed filtering in the statistics widget on the top right, but in the sort of map filtering widget on the top left, you can't kind of narrow it down to sort of a particular month and get a kind of a snapshot of the IS landscape in, say, I don't know, October 2016 or something like that. That's generally useful. I think it's particularly useful for example, very often in trials of terrorist suspects. A key part of the discussion is to establish what did the world look like, what did the landscape of terrorism look like around the time when the person was radicalized or engaged in these activities, and that those points in time can vary from one case to another, and so you will help people by allowing that kind of snapshot map view. Another possibility would be to perhaps allow for the option to project other types of data onto the map. For example, GTT data. The GTT data they're open access. They're geocoded, and you could imagine some situations where you might want to sort of compare the kind of the activity levels that your data is showing with the activity level that the GCD is showing, and that might help you solve some of the sort of problems or limitations that these data have at the moment. And this is sort of my last section. So one challenge, I think, or possible misunderstanding among users is that it's not comprehensive on any one dimension. So it's not, you're very explicit and open about this, and that's fair. You're not aiming to show the full extent of attacks, for example, nor are you aiming to project every single IS document onto a map. So you're projecting some incidents and some documents. The problem then is that it may not be clear to all readers like how representative these incidents that you're showing are from the broader pool of IS incidents, and how representative these documents are from the wider pool of documents. So anything you can do to sort of to mitigate that would be great. Another, I think, thing to bear in mind for users is this question of context. That of course, there are some parts of the world where IS is operating alone, but in many other cases they're not. They're operating alongside a bunch of other groups, and sometimes it's in a very very intense, complicated zone, and that's going to obviously shape the amount of activity. So when we see that activity arises in a particular time and place, it helps to know that whether or not there was a war going on in that location at that time, because that will account for that increase. Whereas if that same increase happens in a country of peace, that's a much more significant development. You see what I mean? So this links back to my sort of suggestion of perhaps bringing in GTD data, because that can provide some of that context. And finally, final point, and this is perhaps also kind of a jumping board to wider discussion, which is that the map, I suppose, doesn't fully convey transnational operations. So, and this, after all, is what tends to attract attention. Attacks that are sort of planned, say, in the Middle East and then executed somewhere in the West, or planned in Africa, executed in South Asia, for example. So an attack that takes place in, say, Thailand, that's orchestrated by a group in Thailand, it tends to draw much less attention than an attack in Thailand that's planned, say, in the Middle East. So this sort of international dimension of the activity doesn't come through quite as clearly in this map, and might perhaps, again, it's a matter of communication with users. Some users might say, "Oh, this is just like a bunch of kind of regional organizations and sort of regional groups that you have ISIS in Congo and they operate only in Congo." Well, what then makes it different from any other kind of rebel groups, and so on? So think of a way to sort of include that dimension, which again raises the question. Let's assume that we were to plot this. Well, what would we see? And I think my answer would be that we, at least in the past few years, we have not seen that many sort of, at least not long-range transnational operations. And that, of course, is I think, at least the conventional wisdom of the evolution of the jihadi movement in recent years, that these sort of long-range transnational operations have declined in frequency. Which is, of course, why terrorism and jihadism in particular has dropped out of the news cycle. But then, of course, the question is, can this rebound? So, what are the factors what are the things that need to happen for more kind of long-range transnational operations to pick up? But those are just some thoughts, and there are by no means a way to sort of detract from the enormous effort that you and your team have put in here, and the contribution that you have made. This is an important day for the field of jihadism studies. Thank you very much.
Gina, Thomas, thank you so much for your comments and contributions. Aaron, of course, thank you. and your team for taking the time to put this together. Let me ask a couple of opening questions as the moderator. I have a bunch of questions that have come in already, but I remind anybody who's on the Zoom is welcome to submit their questions directly through the Q&A, which is in the bottom center of your screen. And if you are watching us on YouTube or the Washington Institute's website, you're encouraged to send your questions via email to the email address policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. So Aaron, as you go through the process of collating this tremendous amount of data and then synthesizing it and putting it into a visual depiction, when you sit back now, of course you're not done because you're adding in more stuff all the time, but when you sit back now, what kind of key trends have you noticed, or what kind of key trends do you think of as something that this tool can help people identify?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Thinking about us inputting this data over the recent months and years. So one of the things that I've noticed increasingly that I think is relevant for everybody and goes to part of the discussion that both Gina and Thomas have talked about is the fact that we've seen an increase in the Islamic State in Afghanistan or the Khorasan province being interested in not only being involved in attacks in Afghanistan against the Taliban, as well as against Shia, as well as local diplomatic presences, but they've increasingly been interested in potentially doing more abroad, whether that's with their propaganda being translated into multiple languages besides Urdu and Pashto to English, Arabic, Farsi, or the fact we've seen not just the propaganda, but also them then trying to actualize attacks. So as I noted, there was the attack this past October in Iran, which was directly connected to ISKP. But there have been also other plots that thus far have been broken up in other countries as well, on top of other ones in Iran, whether there have been a number in Turkey. There's been one or two in maybe India. And then just this past week, there was a case in Germany where two individuals were being connected with ISKP individuals abroad. So even if we haven't seen the large scale sort of directed type of attacks that we might have seen from IS in Syria back with the Paris attacks or the Brussels attacks, but the so-called middle type of attacks, the guided attacks where people from the war zone are talking on encrypted applications with people in other countries and pushing them to do an attack and providing them with guidance. That's something to think about, since the fall of IS's territorial control in Iraq and Syria in 2019, we really haven't seen a lot of linkages between the organization and interested individuals abroad trying to do attacks, whereas the fact that increasingly over the last 6-8 months, we've seen ISKP really put this up more, signals that there is some intentions, and it's something that people should be thinking about, and something that you would see in the map, not only from the propaganda, but the fact that, you do have the claim of responsibility for the attack in Iran. You do have the arrest data related to the plots, the other plots in Iran and Turkey and India and Germany. So you could pick up a pattern before it maybe becomes an even larger issue than the one we saw with IS in Iraq and Syria, where you started to see 1s and 2s and 3s. And then all of a sudden there was this large scale attack campaign going on for a couple of years in Europe in particular.
So I'd like to follow up on comments that both Gina and Thomas made and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about, as going into this project, what you saw as your primary audiences, why you decided to include certain tools and not others. Feel free to throw me under the bus as the guy who kept raising the issue of costs. That's fair. Why you chose to have certain types of widgets and functions as opposed to others.
Yeah, creating a map at this level, there's a lot of decisions along the way that we had to make. Of course, those that know my work know that, I started jihadology, and therefore I had a huge reservoir of archives related to their videos, statements, audios, and the like. And then in my own personal archives, I had all of the pictures that they've released over the years. So that, of course, was an important starting point. But then I also wanted to build off of this based off of other types of primary sources, whether it was the designations from the government to try and link sort of how the propaganda then connects to leaders and entities and individuals within the broader IS system. And then, I was inspired by the work at the Program on Extremism with George Washington in relation to their court documents. I thought that it would be really interesting to map how that played out, but we wanted to not only extend it beyond the US, but to try and do it abroad as well. Obviously, there are a bit more complications when you start getting abroad, since the US is a bit more transparent than most other countries in terms of the release of court documents. But at least in the case of other countries, we tried to use press releases from the particular government agency or a particular court. And if that wasn't available, we would then try and use the local media reports on the case itself, so that then you would be able to potentially link different types of activity and plots all over the world, depending on how it might relate or not relate to one another. Because of the fact we didn't include every single IS attack on the map, we still wanted to have a feature that at least provided you a picture of what this was over time, which is why the statistics box was created. So you'd still have a quantitative understanding of how much activity they've done overall, but then you can break it down by the particular provinces. Part of this is just the breadth of the amount of attacks that the group has done, especially in the larger scale conflict zones, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Nigeria, and increasingly places like the DRC, Mozambique, Mali, etc. We didn't want the map to just be attacks. We wanted to show all this other types of data. So essentially made the determination, if a country has had less than 100 attacks, we'd consider that a terrorist zone essentially for the group, and we would include every single claim of responsibility related to it. If a country has more than 100 claims of responsibility, we would have the first 100 claims when it was starting to build itself up, but then otherwise afterwards, we would just have a more curated view of the attacks, and it would be the largest scale attacks that they would conduct. And that'd be primarily based off of, them showing off. For those that follow the propaganda, they, instead of a small text box, would be a larger text box with also pictures. And then also sometimes they'll share pictures of actual operations that they do. So, it was a hard determination, but we wanted to make this also usable, where it wasn't just an overwhelming amount of data that wouldn't necessarily be useful. So it was, we had to make decisions, but I think overall it has the basis that will be useful. And as we noted, we're planning on continuing to add more data to the archive historically, as well as contemporaneously adding new content as well. As you saw in my presentation, I showcased some of the more recent stuff just from this month. So we're looking forward to hearing feedback so we can improve this, as well as the type of features we want to add potentially in the future as well, to make this even more useful to people in government, researchers, people at NGOs, humanitarian organizations, international lawyers working on war crimes and the like.
So we've got some kind of thematic questions and some very specific, just factual questions about the map that have come in. Those maybe we can do kind of quickly. So do you have plans to incorporate all reported or claimed IS attacks to the map at some point? And how often do you anticipate adding entries to the product?
At this point, we don't have any particular plans to add every single claimed attack. At this point, it's definitely something we could maybe do in the future, but we're trying to first fill out the data as much as we can globally. And once we get through all of that, then it's something we could think about. What was the second half of the question again? Sorry.
And how frequently do you?
Oh, well, whenever something new comes up, I'll send an email to Sarah, who works with me as a research assistant, and then she helps input it into our Airtable database. And then it goes through an editing process so that, everything, sounds nice when people read the entries. So it just depends, but pretty much the day that something happens, whether it's a claim of responsibility, whether it's a video, whether it's a picture, whether it's a designation, whether it's a court case, I'm emailing it to the team, and it's going into the Airtable, and then it just depends on how long the editing process takes. But it'll obviously be updated as quickly as possible. I mean, if you looked at the amount of entries in the map now versus, say, a month ago, there's probably a few hundred more now than there was a month ago, let alone 6 months ago and the like. So it'll continuously be updated and added pretty quickly, I think.
She's off camera. You can't see her, but Sarah is giving a knowing smile and nod. So these are being added regularly. A broad question from a journalist who's participating. What insights did you gain into ISIS from putting this interactive map together that you hadn't seen before? Is there anything that surprised you when you were able to see the data now in this new format?
That's a really good question. I think one of the interesting things for me, because a lot of the data I usually work with is more the primary sources from the group side, so the videos, statements, and what have you. Looking at the content from the government side was very interesting too, to see how that tracks as well, and how interlinked in some ways the designations are to some of the propaganda, or maybe how interlinked the court cases are to the designations. And you could very much see that there's a lot more linkages than I think meet the eye when you're just casually reading a headline in the news, or maybe zeroing in on a particular country, but don't necessarily realize all these other, examples of how there are these connections across the broader network related to IS, from the individual level to the group level to the sort of senior leadership level, and then in between the various provinces of the group itself.
One of the things that you include in this tool is material on ISIS propaganda. So one of our participants asks, what does that tell us about the future of the group? Why is it important to understand IS propaganda?
I think it's really important because in many ways they sort of see where they're going ahead of people really realizing where they're acting in terms of focusing on a particular country, or you can see that there's sort of an increase of activity in a particular location, or showing how maybe a new province is integrating more into IS as a whole. So for example, there are early questions, a year or two ago about like, what's the deal with this IS branch in the Democratic Republic of Congo or Mozambique? Who would have ever thought this? And people were skeptical, but increasingly over time, as they continue to conduct attacks and be integrated into sort of the media operation of the group, you could see how it was more and more connected to sort of the methodologies that the group used in other locations as well. And you could say that for maybe other locations also. So there's just a lot of various ways you can use the propaganda to better understand it. And then in some interesting ways, you could also see the lag time then between when IS starts doing activity or putting out products in particular locales, and then when the government actually starts to pay attention to it in terms of putting out press releases related to designations, or when you might start seeing that there might be something related to that group in a plot back in another country. So it'd be interesting also to maybe determine sort of those lag times between when there's sort of an upstart and then when you see that then being processed by a government, or then there being some inspiration elsewhere.
So we have a series of other questions that we're not going to have time to get to, but Aaron, you're able to access those too to get that input. I do want, before we end, to give Thomas and Gina an opportunity to give in some last thoughts. Let's go reverse order this time. Thomas, why don't you go first?
Thank you. Yeah. No, I think this discussion and the project illustrates the significance of compiling good data, and I think there's a really important message to be transmitted to politicians, funders, people who kind of on whom we researchers depend for kind of continued work, and that is to continue supporting effort to compile data, even if the topic is not headline news right now. the temporary or the kind of the near defunding of GTD, for example, was a sort of potentially a big disaster, because if you sort of stop compiling data, like at some point, then all of the previous efforts are kind of wasted because they can't be used to kind of create longer time series and analysis. So yeah. I really hope that the powers that be, will allow you, Aaron, and your colleagues to continue this type of work.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Gina, please.
Yeah, I would just add that this is the future of higher ed. Students don't like to be lectured to anymore. They like to learn by exploring, and you've created something that I think is going to be incredibly useful and informative for college courses, for young analysts coming in. And I'm just really grateful that I got to see it from the ground up and be part of this today. So thank you very much for including me.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Look, at the end of the day, one of the things we're trying to do is to create an element of one-stop shopping. There's other great sources out there, but especially for students, for new analysts, for people who are being onboarded, this is a great place to start and explore. This is just the latest map to be developed by the Reinhardt Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligence here at the Washington Institute. It builds on the work we did with our Lebanese Hezbollah map, and we have a third map in development now that we'll tell you about as it gets closer. But in the meantime, we promise to continue to update and populate these maps. Thomas, don't worry, this is going to continue to be relevant. We're here to serve. Thank you both very, very much for taking the time to join us, to everybody who joined us online and on Zoom today. And Aaron, most of all, thank you to you and to your team for all the work you guys have done to make this possible. It's a really cool tool. It takes a lot of time and hard work that isn't so cool to make it real. And thank you for doing it. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Everybody have a great day. Be safe, be healthy. Thank you.